We often get questions about understanding these really complex social structures.
Hmm.
And today we thought we'd do a deep dive, really focus in on one specific group, the Grape Street Watts Crips.
Right. A lot of listeners seem interested in getting a clearer picture, moving beyond just the headlines.
Exactly. So we've pulled together some info, mostly drawing from a detailed Wikipedia entry on them.
And the idea, our mission really, is to kind of extract the key points, their history, where they operate, some major events and rivalries.
Yeah, make it understandable without getting totally bogged down in, excessive detail, a clear overview.
Precisely, give you the core knowledge, the stuff that really matters for understanding this particular set.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. The name itself, Grape Street Watts Crips, kind of gives us some clues right off the bat, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It tells you, number one, they're a set, a specific faction within the larger Crips identity.
And the Watts part, well, that clearly points to their origins. The Watts neighborhood in Los Angeles.
Spot on. The source material confirms that directly. Founded there, based there. It's that strong geographical anchor.
Which is pretty common for groups like this, that neighborhood identity.
Very common. It shapes a lot of territory, recruitment, rivalries, that sense of local belonging.
And this isn't just some historical footnote, is it? I mean, they're still active.
Oh, yeah. The information suggests activity from the 1970s right through to today. Well, it's over 50 years.
50 years. That's significant longevity.
Mhm.
Makes you think about the factors that allow that kind of continuity.
It really does. And what's interesting is that it's not just contained to Watts or even California.
Where else?
Well, the source specifically flags a presence in Tennessee and also New Jersey. There were web links pointing to activity there.
Tennessee and New Jersey. Wow. Okay, so that challenges the idea of them being purely local.
Definitely. It shows a kind of geographic spread, raises questions about how those connections form and are maintained across states.
Yeah, how does that even work? Okay, something else that really jumped out was the rivalry aspect, specifically with the bounty hunter Bloods.
Ah, yes. That seems absolutely central to their story, especially in Watts.
The source described it in pretty stark terms, didn't it?
It did. It called the feud, and I'm quoting loosely here, the most violent and long-lasting feud between two gangs in the Watts area.
The most violent and long-lasting. That says a lot about the intensity.
It really frames it as something fundamental, deeply ingrained in their history and identity in that specific location, not just some minor issue.
Right. And speaking of violence, there was a specific event mentioned that seemed particularly impactful, the 2008 murder of Brandon Beal Bullard.
Yes, that event seems pivotal. It really underscores the potential for devastating consequences.
What were the reported consequences?
According to the source, his murder, which was apparently carried out by the East Coast Crips.
Wait, East Coast Crips, so internal Crip conflict.
Exactly. Which highlights that it's not always monolithic. But the aftermath, it reportedly sparked a wave of retaliation. The numbers cited were 26 wounded and 9 dead in just the 6 weeks following.
9 dead in 6 weeks. That's staggering. A single event triggering that much bloodshed.
It's a stark illustration of how quickly things can escalate and the human cost involved.
Absolutely. And the fact it was internal Crip conflict adds another layer of complexity, doesn't it?
It certainly does. It points to those internal politics and tensions that can exist within these larger affiliations.
Now, thinking about how people might know about them, has there been media coverage?
There has. The entry mentions they were featured in a documentary called Crips and Bloods, made in America.
Oh, the Stacey Peralta film?
That's the one. So for listeners wanting maybe a different perspective, a visual one, that documentary exists.
Right, that could offer more context, maybe even personal stories. It puts a face to it, in a way.
Exactly. It reminds us these are, real social phenomena with real people involved, not just names on a page.
The source also seemed to link them pretty strongly to a specific place within Watts, the Jordan Downs housing project.
That connection is highlighted. It's often the case that specific housing projects or blocks become closely associated with particular groups.
Kind of like a central hub or territory.
Yeah, reinforcing those territorial aspects and, community ties, however complicated they might be.
And that kind of strong territorial presence combined with alleged activities inevitably leads to interactions with law enforcement.
Right. That's a major part of the picture painted by the sources. There's quite a bit of documented law enforcement activity mentioned.
Across different places and times, it seems.
Yes, and involving different alleged crimes. It shows sustained attention. For instance, there was that 2019 indictment in Tennessee.
Back to Tennessee again. What was that about?
Drug trafficking. 16 individuals reportedly tied to the gang were indicted. It really reinforces that point about geographic reach.
It does. Makes you wonder how these networks operate.
Then there was also a takedown mentioned in New Jersey.
Okay, the other state mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and what was interesting there was a detail about a leader apparently using Instagram.
Using Instagram, like for gang activity.
Well, the source implies a connection. It's just a reminder that these groups adapt. They use modern tech like everyone else. They're not frozen in time.
Good point. Shows adaptation. What else on the law enforcement side?
Well, shifting back to L.A., there's mention of a Superior Court case involving someone named Cordell Hawkins, local judicial action.
Okay.
And then linked to the aftermath of the Bullard murder in 2008, there was an NPR report mentioned.
What did that cover?
It talked about law enforcement specifically targeting shot callers, the leadership figures in L.A. gangs, a strategic approach, seemingly.
Targeting the leadership to disrupt the organization.
That seems to be the idea, yes. Trying to destabilize the structure from the top.
And it seems like there were other incidents, too. Drug-related.
Oh, yeah. Several mentions. An ABC7 report on a big PCP bust in South LA, 20 arrests. Then FBI press releases about sentencing a leader for PCP distribution, and another announcing broader charges against the Grape Street Crips specifically.
So multiple federal actions focused on them.
Seems so. And the LA Times also comes up articles about indictments for PCP sales and also about retaliatory shootings in Watts.
Right. So if you put all these pieces together, the Tennessee indictment, the New Jersey takedown, the LA court cases, the focus on leaders, the PCP bust, the FBI charges, the reporting on violence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even though they're from different years and cover different types of alleged activity.
It paints a picture of pretty consistent, multifaceted attention from law enforcement over time, doesn't it?
It really does. From local to federal levels, focused on various aspects, from drug operations spanning states to violence within their home territory. It's not just one or two isolated things.
Okay, so as we kind of pull this together, wrapping up this particular deep dive, what are the main things we should take away about the Grape Street Watts Crips based on this information?
Well, I'd say first, they are a long-standing, established Crips set. Deep roots in Watts, going back decades to the 70s.
Right, the longevity is key.
Second, that rivalry with the bounty hunter Bloods in Watts is clearly a defining and apparently very violent feature.
That intense local conflict. Got it.
Third, they're not just confined to L.A. There's evidence, or at least reported links, suggesting a presence in other states like Tennessee and New Jersey.
That geographic spread, yeah.
And finally, their activities, or alleged activities, have drawn significant and ongoing attention from both the media, like that documentary, and importantly, from various law enforcement agencies.
Okay, so history, location, a major rivalry, geographic reach, and sustained law enforcement focus. That gives a pretty good snapshot.
I think so. It covers the key dimensions highlighted in the source material we looked at.
Which leads us to maybe a final thought for our listeners to mull over.
Exactly. Something to think about after hearing all this. Considering that history, that 50-plus years, considering the geographic reach we talked about, and how deeply rooted these affiliations seem to be, what underlying factors, maybe social, maybe economic, do you think really contribute to that kind of resilience? How do these affiliations manage to not just persist for so long, but also spread?
That's a big question. No easy answers there, I imagine.
Definitely not. But it pushes us to think beyond just the surface events and consider the deeper currents, the environment in which these groups exist and endure. Something to ponder.